Hello, and thank you for joining us for the special audiobook launch of Bending Towards the Sun. I am Michelle Gold, board chair at Holocaust Museum LA. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Holocaust Museum LA is the first survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. Founded in the early 1960s by a group of survivors who wanted to create a safe place to display their precious artifacts in perpetuity and to remember their family members and loved ones who perished, and to help educate the public so that no one would ever forget. We are really honored to have author Leslie Gilbert-Lurie, her mother Rita, and son Gabe with us today. Leslie Gilbert-Lurie is a lawyer, author, philanthropist, a former television creative executive, and a community leader. Leslie is a member of the International Board of Directors of Human Rights Watch, the Alliance for Children's Rights Board of Directors, the Pacific Council on International Policy, and the UCLA Foundation Board of Directors. She also served on the Los Angeles County Board of Education for 15 years. Leslie spent much of her earlier career as a television executive at NBC and then as a consultant for USA Network and Disney Television. Welcome, Leslie, and welcome, Rita, and welcome, Gabe. We are also honored to introduce today's moderator, Jessica Yellin. Jessica is a Peabody, Gracie, and Emmy Award-winning political journalist. She is the past chief White House correspondent for CNN. She has reported for CNN, ABC, and MSNBC. At CNN, Jessica covered the White House, Capitol Hill, and domestic politics. She is the founder of News Not Noise, which is dedicated to providing you with substantive, succinct information on the stories that impact your life. Jessica, thank you for serving as moderator today. There will be time at the end of today's program to answer questions, so if you do have any, please type them in the Q&A box. And now, with no further ado, we welcome you, Jessica Yellin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting this and for having this conversation, and to the Lurie family. I'm very excited to begin. For those of you who haven't read the book, Bending Toward the Sun is a harrowing and intimate account of the impact of the Holocaust on 3 generations, how trauma passes through families and how they can seek to heal it. And now it is out in audiobook. As I said, we'll discuss it all. Before we launch into the conversation, I just want to frame it by saying, as we hold this discussion, anti-Semitism is on the rise in the US and around the globe. A Pew Research Center poll at the end of last year found 63% of Americans under the age of 40 did not know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. On that note, Leslie, I want to turn it over to you because I think it would be productive for us to begin with a summary of the book and letting everybody know what this story is about.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you to the Holocaust Museum LA, where I know that my mom, and Rita, and Gabe, we're all thrilled to be here, and we were really grateful and excited, Jessica, that you were able to do this with us. I'm going to start by just talking much more briefly than I usually do, about 15 minutes to summarize our story. And in the course of that, hope my mother will also read a couple pages in her words from our book. And then I really look forward to the conversation because, as Jessica just implied in the Pew study she mentioned, this conversation is more important than ever. My mother was born in 1937 in a small village in Poland. X marks the spot there, called Używice, on the southeast side of Poland, not far from the Russian border. And she remembers her early years as being fairly normal. She was, her family was religious, and my mother's earliest memories are celebrating Jewish holidays with her sister, who was a year older, her baby brother, her parents, and her father was one of 13 children. So she had a lot of aunts and uncles and grandparents. She has vivid memories of Passover and Shabbat celebrations. Aside from that, the thing that stands out most from her earliest years is one day when she was 4 years old. As you all know, World War II started in 1939, right? Germany invaded Poland, and in just a few days defeated Poland. My mother's uncles were a part of the Polish army, but because my mother was so young and they were in a small village, she really didn't know that much of this was going on until one day when she was 4.5 years old in the spring of 1942. My mother remembers looking out of her kitchen window one day and seeing Nazi tanks roll by her kitchen window. And she told me when we were writing this book that at that moment, she felt everything in her body freeze. And she just knew that her life would never again be the same. Shortly after that, her family received an order to report to the local train station. They had to make a decision as to whether they would follow this order or not. So her family got together, the aunts and uncles and grandparents, and for some reason, they decided not to follow the order, not to report to the local train station. When we were writing the book, my mother and I tried to learn more about why her family made that decision. Some relatives suggested that there were increasing rumors of Jewish people getting on these trains and not returning to the village. This was the spring of 1942, just after the Wannsee Conference, the famous Nazi conference, where they had decided on the final solution. So instead of just randomly shooting Jewish people in their towns, there was a much more methodical, put people on trains, heading east to concentration camps. One of my mother's cousins thinks it wasn't just the rumors, though, that in their tiny village, Nazi soldiers were actually living with the villagers by that point. 3 Nazi soldiers were stationed at the home of one of my mother's cousins. His name was Mr. Arnold, one of them. And Mr. Arnold used to wait for my mother's uncle to get home from work and play chess with him. And my mother's cousin Sally said that she thinks Mr. Arnold told her father, don't trust the Nazis, don't take them at their word. Because as you all know, the Nazis had these 2 weapons at their disposal, right, to fight the Holocaust, to fight this war within a war. One was force, but the other was propaganda. They would say, report to the train station and bring your 2 bags, and all of this stuff designed to break down the Jewish people's defenses. So my mother's family decided not to report to the local train station. Instead, on a dark night, they packed up their belongings in knapsacks and they left home. This was my mother, her sister, her baby brother, her parents, and her cousins who lived down the street. There were 5 girls in that family, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, just like my mom, and 2 babies, 2 twins. One of the twins was not well enough to go into hiding. Her family brought her to a local church, but the rest of the group decided they would head off together. All the other aunts and uncles went separately because no one wanted to be with the group with the children, since children make noise and they're harder to travel with. But my mother's group left home, and for the next 6 weeks, they slept in forests, in ditches, on farms. There was a lot of farmland where my mother was living in Poland. Sometimes they would find haystacks and pull out the hay from the haystacks. As you could see, this is my mother's cousin Sally showing us what they used to do years later when we returned to Poland. Sometimes the family would hide in haystacks like this. But my mother's family knew they had to find a safer solution. They had all these children. This was summer now of 1942. And they knew, first of all, the Nazis kept very careful records of Jewish people and what was going on. So Nazis would be knocking at villagers' door by this point, ask where my mother's family was. Also kids make noise. And also it gets really cold in Poland in the winter. It snows. The family had to find somewhere safer. So they thought about who might help them. They thought about a farmer named Staszek Grocholski, who had grown up near my mother's family. They knew him to be a good person. He would sneak out dark nights, bringing them bits of food and news. They said, please, could you hide our family for a few days? At first he said, no, my wife won't allow it. As you all know, the punishment for helping a Jewish family was death. But after a while, he said, one day he said, okay, your family could come to our house. My mother's family snuck over to his house, climbed up a steep attic and climbed up a steep ladder into an attic. And the attic was 5 feet high. This is my sister climbing up into the attic when we returned to Poland when I was in my 20s. This is Maria Grocholski, Staszek's wife, on the right in the center photo, talking to my mother's cousin, Sally. And this is the way the walls of the attic looked, with little slats they could peek through to see what was going on in the outside world. The attic was 5 feet high, 15 feet wide, and 25 feet long. At first, there were 11 of them in this attic. And a few days after my mother's family got to the attic, 4 more of my mother's uncles, who were in their late teens and early 20s, found them, and they came into the attic too. So now there were 15 people hiding in an attic that was 25 feet long, 15 feet wide. And life in the attic was very difficult. It was, first of all, they couldn't make any noise because Nazi soldiers would come by this farmhouse to get provisions, to get eggs and cheese. So even if a child in the attic cried, one of the adults would put a pillow to their face, or we learned later the family downstairs would hit one of their own children so that the cries from downstairs would cover up all the noise upstairs. And in the winter, as I mentioned, it was freezing cold in the attic. There was just straw on the ground. In the summer, it was so hot. Even though there was a well right outside that they would have been able to get water, they couldn't, because again, they could never be seen during the day. The children weren't allowed to talk. They weren't allowed to walk. After a while, the Grocholskis were afraid to bring food up because they were so afraid of being caught. Neighbors one time came by and said, why do you need all these potatoes? And Mrs. Grocholski panicked and she said, oh, my horses, they have bad teeth. I have to peel the potatoes for my horses. So the uncles would sneak out at night sometimes and get food. Sometimes neighbors would even leave bits of food for them. But life in the attic was very difficult. And now, Mom, why don't you read a couple pages in your own words from our book, and then I'll wrap up my summary in just a few sentences and we'll get questions.
Okay. God, why are you doing this? Aunt Sylvia asked tearfully in the dark one night. My uncles had asked the same questions, but I never heard an answer. Tato, why isn't God helping us? I managed to ask my father the next morning after watching him go through his religious ritual. It is not God who has forsaken us, my father told me. So we still believe in God, right? I asked. Of course. My father never lost faith. His morning and evening prayers probably helped him to keep some sense of order and feel in control of at least the spiritual part of his life. I was still confused about God's role, but I didn't want to ask too many questions. By 1944, we had been in the attic for more than a year and a half. My brother Nachum, then 5, became very ill with dehydration, malnutrition, probably lack of stimulation. He lay helplessly in a corner and weakly cried, Mama. I don't think he had ever been seen by a doctor. One morning I awoke to a lot of commotion. He can't be dead, my mother sobbed, cradling my brother in her arms. Nahum, wake up, little baby. The adults were crying hysterically. My father was trying to comfort my mother. Dad, what did that mean? My brother couldn't be gone. It was incomprehensible to me. As Uncle Max took Nahum's lifeless body out of my mother's trembling arms, I closed my eyes and pretended that what was happening was not real. Nahum's death left 13 of us in the attic, at least for the time being.
Shortly after my mother's brother died, her mother died also in the attic. My mother remembers watching her whole family gathered around as her mother lit a Shabbat candle. They always had to blow it out very quickly because they were afraid of fire in the attic, but her mother lit a Shabbat candle and looked around at each family member, and then she put her head down and she died also. Just shortly after that, in the July of 1944, my mother's family had been in the attic for 2 years. One morning, Stasha Grocholski came upstairs. They heard shouting outside and flares overhead. And he said, "The war's over. You're free to leave." And even though, as we all know, the war was not over in July of 1944, my mother's family made their way down out of the attic. My mother couldn't walk. She had rickets and tuberculosis. The children hadn't moved in so long. My mother, it took her months to even learn how to pronounce certain letters again because the children hadn't talked. But they made their way out of the attic. They thanked the Grocholskis and promised they would never tell anyone where they were hidden. And they slowly made their way back home. For the next, I'll shorten the ending to say that for the next 5 years, my mother's family moved in and out of displaced persons' homes throughout Europe because they were threatened when they went back to their home in Poland. They were told that they had to leave or they would be killed if they stayed in their home. So this is my mother's family in a displaced persons camp in Italy. My mother was in a hospital for a year in Italy first, but and my mother's father actually got remarried to the woman you see in the bottom toward the left, Clara, in a displaced persons camp. That's my mother and her sister in the top left corner with a baby brother. My mother, finally, a distant uncle sponsored my mother's family. She came to this country at the age of 12. She had never been to school before. She started school in the 7th grade in the Bronx in New York and didn't speak a word of English, but wound up graduating from high school at 17 years and went through a serious depression right when she graduated from high school. And the way we got the name of our book, Bending Toward the Sun, is my mother told me that after she got psychological counseling, she said one day she noticed again that the trees had leaves, that the flowers had colors. She said, "I felt myself bending toward the sun." And that was the kind of hopefulness we wanted to inspire others to have as well in the darkest times. Eventually, I was born, and we could talk about how trauma gets transmitted, but suffice it to say that I had a lot of separation anxiety, a lot of guilt for having so many things my mother didn't have. Eventually, I grew up, became a lawyer, got married, had my children, and I was really sure that they would not suffer any of the anxiety that I had had with me and my husband, who's not connected with the Holocaust at all, as a bumper between my mother and my children. So I was very surprised to see that my children were extremely impacted, each in different ways. In the book, my daughter writes a chapter about her separation anxiety and other anxiety related to the Holocaust. But I'm really thrilled that Gabe, my son, is here today to share his experience. Gabe graduated from Wesleyan University, is currently a television executive at Studio Ramsey, developing television shows with Gordon Ramsay's production company. And this is the first time I think Gabe's done this with us. So hi, Gabe. And why don't we, I'm going to go back to you, Jessica. This is an abbreviated version, but I'd love to hear your questions and connecting our experience to the world today.
Great. What a powerful story, and an amazing opportunity to talk to all of you. I thought I'd start with you, Rita, and just ask simply, why did you decide to write a book about such a horrific time in your life? A lot of people would say, I want to forget that. I want to move on. You didn't.
I didn't want to forget it. I wanted to remember it because I went through severe depressions from trying to hide it. And so I needed to really deal with what happened. And let's see, what was I gonna say? I decided to write a book because I was beginning to hear a lot of things about the people beginning to not to believe in the Holocaust, and that it never happened, and so that made me very angry. And I said, I'm gonna write a book. So I brought it up to Leslie, and Leslie agreed, and I was very happy about that. So we wrote the book together, and it brought us even closer together than a regular mother and daughter. I feel very close to her, and I love her so very much. I love all my children. They're my grandchildren.
Well, let me take it to one of your grandchildren. Gabe, we haven't heard from you. Can you talk a little bit about how your grandmother's experience impacted who you are in the course of your life?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's hard to say because on one hand, I actually don't feel like I grew up with a traumatized grandmother, even though clearly I did. But growing up, I mean, she was just a great, normal grandma as far as I was concerned. Like I'd go over to her house, we'd do things. I remember I used to help her with the gardening and.
Oh, Gabe's frozen. Leslie, are you there?
Uh-oh.
I think Gabe and Leslie are frozen right now. Okay.
Can you, Gabe, are you back?
Yep, I could hear the whole time. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, all this to say, like, growing up as a kid, you just internalized it as this is what happened to my family. Obviously, you heard the stories, but you don't think much of it till you're older. So I think it, probably impacted in a lot of ways that I don't see, but all I have context of is my growing up experience. So, yeah, I mean, I would say it makes me care more about my family and protecting my family and protecting myself. And so you do develop different characteristics based on what happened to your family in the past.
Leslie, would you talk a little bit about generational trauma, which I think is actually really important right now? So many people after COVID and after the year we've lived through suddenly understand what trauma is in a way they didn't before. But you've had this awareness of it for years, since your early childhood. So how has it impacted your life, and what lessons do you have for other people about how to cope with generational trauma? Uh-oh, you're frozen. The gremlins of Zoom are intervening. Rita, would you like to address that while we're waiting for, Leslie,
Okay.
You're there. Okay, Leslie.
Oh, she's there.
Okay, sorry, for us, you were frozen. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you didn't hear the question. Okay, the question was, so many people now after COVID and the year we've had are understanding what trauma really is in a very personal way. But you've known this since childhood. Can you talk a little bit about what inherited and generational trauma does and what lessons you've learned about coping with that you could share?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up thinking about trauma. I didn't even connect the way I was to my mother's experience at the time. But but what we learned in the course of writing the book is that there are various theories about how trauma gets transmitted from generation to generation. There are psychoanalytic theories that say if one generation represses an experience, the next generation will inherit that experience. There are sociological theories that say if you grew up in a house where your parent is always saying, like my mom was, be careful, be careful, you'll grow up, feeling like, you might fall off the curb if you're walking too close to the curb, or it might be a bad thing to smile at every stranger you see. But then I think the most interesting theories are epigenetic theories. And there are a lot of researchers looking at epigenetics now, looking at how one generation's trauma literally changes your DNA in the next generation, or at least temporarily, not in a Darwinian sense, but in a sense that there's a great researcher in New York named Rachel Yehuda, and she has done a lot of studies with 9/11 survivors, for example. And but she also worked with Holocaust survivors, and she did a study, for example, that tested the cortisol levels of Holocaust survivors 50 years after the Holocaust, and found that you had really heightened levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Then she tested the levels of their children and found that they also had really heightened levels of that stress hormone. And what that meant was they were much more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and all kinds of illnesses related, all kinds of stress related illnesses. And even more recently, there are studies that were done, a couple of years ago, study was done with separating baby mice from their parents I think it was in Sweden. And what they found is for 4 generations, they tracked PTSD symptoms in mice who were prematurely separated from their mothers. So, they've done studies showing obesity in grandchildren of Irish potato famine survivors. So very much, believe that this is a real phenomenon, but that being aware of it could help us avoid some of by being able to talk about it and anticipate consequences can help us avoid those consequences.
Rita, would you add to that? How did psychotherapy help in your healing, and what advice would you offer to young people who experience trauma?
Well, it helped me to deal with life in many ways. First of all, I was very depressed. And as I talked about my depression and tried to focus in on why I'm so depressed, and it happened as I graduated from high school and was on my own as my friends went on to college and or to work. I felt very depressed, and very soon I got a job because I had to go to work. But somehow I managed to treat myself before I even got help. I just knew that I had to survive, and my mother would have wanted me to survive. Excuse me.
But Mom, you also have said that, that therapy at different times in your life really turned around how you were, made a huge difference in how you were feeling, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. I didn't hear you.
You've also talked about how therapy at different times in your life made a huge difference for you, psychotherapy.
Oh yeah,
right?
Very, very definitely, yes. Yes, it helped me a lot. And it helped me to be strong with my family, to bring up my children. As I dealt with my past, in the doctor's office. And little by little, my children started asking me questions. So I began to talk about my treatment. And I felt like I wasn't somebody who had to just stay within myself. I could talk. And my kids wanted to hear about my life. So I really opened up and told them what happened during the war. And I never planned on doing it, but they were very curious and they wanted to know everything.
And you continue sharing it in forums like this.
Yes.
Leslie, a little bit of a turn. I thought we could talk a little bit about autocratic leaders, what we saw in the Holocaust, and how autocrats come to power and what parallels you might see between World War II and the world we're living in today.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because, I think that that's something we all should be thinking about. One of the, I think there are so many connections, so many relevant lessons from the Holocaust. But, one of the things that we saw in the Holocaust is how Hitler came to power in a democracy and not so unlike our democracy today. And the citizens allowed him to take away rights little by little by little. And by the time people woke up and saw what he was doing, it was too late. They didn't have enough rights left to fight for their rights. And, I think the lesson to today is that we see that really, even in a democracy, democracies are about the majority ruling. And if we believe in human rights and the rights of every individual, then those who are in the majority in a certain situation have to always be on the lookout for everyone else's rights too, because otherwise we're all vulnerable. And so we look at the world today and we look at Hungary and we look at Turkey and we look at Syria and we look at Egypt and, we look at Saudi Arabia and we look at Russia and China and almost and Venezuela and Brazil, almost every direction we turn, there is an autocrat in power who cares more about promoting their own agenda and themselves as opposed to the well-being of citizens. And I think where that leaves us is to understand, one of the lessons I think of the Holocaust is the importance of being an upstander, the importance of the few people who actually didn't go along with what the government was saying and trusted their own instinct as to what was right and wrong, made a huge difference. And I think, my son, my children, my sister and brother and I, we were brought up to really understand that it was our responsibility to do what we could to improve the world. And I think that's what we all have to think today. We can all, look to, look at what's going on in Saudi Arabia. I mean, I understand these things are difficult. It's not, there are implications to a government standing up to, a prince in Saudi Arabia there are implications to everything. But if we don't fight for human rights, we won't have them. They only exist because we all believe they exist.
I wonder, Gabe, I want to come back to you in 1 minute, but I just want to push on this a little bit more, Rita, because in the last 4 years, as we've seen these autocrats come to power around the globe, I've heard a lot of private conversations in fora like this about parallels to the Holocaust. But people are very uncomfortable to make that parallel publicly because it's divisive, it might be misunderstood, you don't know what the reaction is. Do you think it's appropriate to cite the experience of the Holocaust with regard to what we're seeing around the world today? And can you offer any advice on how to talk about it in a way that's sensitive and appropriate, but draws the right lessons from history?
I think it's important to recognize that people who went through the Holocaust, in many ways, are really different people than people who didn't, because it left a mark in everybody's life. And as much as I have worked at being a regular American woman, I know that there are many parts to me that make me who I am, because I wasn't always an American person.
But
An
Mom, does it
American.
bother you? I think just to push on Jessica's question, do you take it personally, or does it bother you in any way when people might compare what's going on in the world? If people say, oh, this is like the Holocaust, does that, how do you feel when people do that?
If they compare what's happening now to the Holocaust?
Mhm.
Well, obviously it's not like the Holocaust. And how do you compare pain? You know, if there's something going on now, which there is always pain. Different people in the world are in pain, and there's hunger even here. And I mean, I understand that there are people have all kinds of pain, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Gabe, when you hear about the rise in anti-Semitism in the world today, and that people in your generation, a majority of people in your generation don't even know the Holocaust happened, what's your emotional reaction to that? And as also somebody who's a content producer, what do you think are the right ways to remedy this?
Ooh, tricky with the job part. So, you know, when I hear about the rise of anti-Semitism in the world today, you know, it's tough. My gut, if you want my gut emotional reaction, it's anger. Of course it is. It's, you know, you're invalidating the experience of my family. You're invalidating the experience of millions of people. You know, really, like, everyone likes to say 6 million Jews were killed, but you think about everyone else who was killed during the Holocaust and World War II. It's tens of millions of people. And to say that it never happened, the erasure of that is like, you know, sometimes it depends what day you catch me on. Sometimes it might make me really angry. Other times you just have to laugh at it because it's so absurd. But in terms of the rise of autocracy in the world today, I you know, it's absolutely a problem. It's happening everywhere. I mean, you see it in our own country with the people we elect and the people we choose to, you know, amplify their voices. And it's hard to know what to do about it on an individual level. I think, as you know, like my mom was touching on earlier, you want to try to be an upstander. And if you see injustice, you speak out against it, and you talk to your friends that maybe don't have the same belief as you, and you have those hard conversations. And I think that's all important to do on an individual level. On a societal level, I wish I had the answer for you of how to help. I think it, you know, obviously starts with education system. I think we have you know, all I know is my own educational experience, but I think we have a really bad education system in the US. I don't think we teach the right things, and I don't think we teach them in the right way, and I don't think we prioritize the right things in what's important to learn to make, you know, good citizens who are capable going into the world and, you know, not only working but being a good person and bettering the world. To take it back to, you know, my job, and as someone that, you know, develops, I actually texted my mom on the side during that I think an executive was a very generous title for what I do, but I do, you know, develop and try to sell TV shows, and that's hard too, because it's a conversation we have a lot internally, and I have an awesome team, and what we talk about a lot is, you want to make something that's good for the world, but people have to watch it, right? It has to be entertaining. Otherwise, we're not making school curriculum videos that people are going to be forced to watch. It has to be something you want to turn on. And so it's actually a really challenging thing to do, because the heavier subjects you go into, the more people kind of feel like, not during my free time, I'm not really interested in that. So it's a hard line to watch. Well, I can say we are working on some things right now that we're hoping to sell that are more social justice oriented, and I would tell you about them, but I can't. But yeah, that would be my response to that.
I thought we'd take some audience questions people have been writing in. This one is for Leslie and Gabe. How do your experiences as the second and third generation of a Holocaust survivor impact your Jewish cultural identity and your religious practice?
Do you mind if I take this one first?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think first of all, I appreciate the distinction between Jewish religious identity and cultural practice, because it's hard for me to say exactly how much of this is because of the Holocaust specifically, but it certainly plays a role in that I fully identify as Jewish. I would never convert because there's, frankly, just not enough of us left. It's a matter of pride. So I would never change religions. On anything where it's, write down your race, I check white Caucasian, and then if on the other box, you write /Jewish, because I do make a racial distinction there, and cultural distinction. But in terms of religiousness, I actually am, very not religious, and in fact, like anti-religious in a lot of ways. I think in terms of how the Holocaust, impacted that, it's hard for me to believe in at least a conscious decision-making higher power that allows the world to run the way it is, unless the other option being that whatever God is there isn't very good at his job, which, sorry to blaspheme on this webinar, but I don't know if you have a different answer, Mom.
Well, I guess first of all, I wouldn't say his, but but I think that where I differ, I definitely grew up appreciating all the cultural aspects of Judaism. I love like celebrating holidays, and I love the best of what I think Judaism is in terms of its values and its connection to family. And I think what I like the most about all religion is how important it is in this world for us to believe in something greater than ourselves. So to me, there's an aspirational sense that it's good for all of us to see the wonder in the world and to look for it. But I have to say, I think in part because of the Holocaust, there's always something sad to me connected with religion, like the fact that I happen to be a religion. I think from the beginning of time, people have this need to find scapegoats and to be better than someone else and to look to other groups to express, to push their frustrations onto. And so the fact that Jewish people from the beginning of time have been, victims in some way, obviously huge successes in other ways. And but to me, there's always like a tinginess of sadness connected to that I can't shake. And I know that's a Holocaust connection.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, Rita, this is also an audience question, building on sort of the feeling of sadness and acknowledging these emotions. This person asks, how or has the pandemic brought to the surface your trauma in a new and fresh way? Or has your experience of being resilient and a survivor allowed you to endure this year with a degree of strength that maybe others might not have?
Well, I'm thinking of something like there was a rule here that if you were away for a couple weeks, when you come back, you have to stay in your room for 14 days to make sure that you didn't catch anything, outside or whatever. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't be able to do this. It'd be like being in the attic. I would not, just feeling that I have to be here without going out would be like being in the attic for me. I didn't say it to anybody, and I didn't have to stay in, but that's the first thought that came to me. Somebody's going to make me stay here, even if I don't want to stay here.
I would say, though, I've been so impressed by my mom in this last year and how much time she's had to spend inside. And I really
Only in this last year.
No, but it made me once again realize like what a survivor you are. And I really thought that your attitude was a little bit impacted by the fact that you believed if you stayed inside there, you were going to be safe. And if you weren't going to die, this wasn't going to be the worst experience you've been through. And I think you've had an amazingly great attitude during this last year, like a surprisingly like very positive attitude compared to like a lot of people, because this has been a horrible year for, so for everybody, for so many people. So
thank you.
Leslie, another question. Would you talk about your trip to Poland and the long-term impact of that trip? And to you, Gabe, have you been there and met the grandchildren of the family that hid your grandma?
Yeah, so I've been there twice. I went once with my cousins in my 20s. One of my cousins, Debbie Goodstein, was making a film called Voices in the Attic, which you could all find on Amazon. And my cousins and I and one of my mother's first cousins went back to Poland, sat up in the attic where our mother had hidden, where our parents had hidden. And that was just a fascinating experience. It came up at the last minute. I was already working. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go. And a producer I was working with, he said, shout out to Tom Patchett. He said, well, of course you want to go. Someday you have these stories to tell that you're going to want to tell your children and grandchildren. And I went and I learned so much of, it's almost like this black and white history I had before came to life. And then when our book came out, my mother and I were asked to speak there, and we went back and Gabe, you could talk about your memories there, but we went back with our kids and my husband. And the one story I would tell you from there is we got out of the van. We were, when we drove to my mother's village one day, and we were looking for her house, and got out of the van, and a 12-year-old girl walked by us on the street, and she said, I know you. And my mother had never wanted to go back. She hadn't been back there since she was 7 years old. This 12-year-old girl through her said in Polish, I know you. And we thought, well, that's just crazy. It turned out that her village had just celebrated its 600-year anniversary. And the teacher noticed that of all the mentions of all the celebrations, there was no mention of the Jewish people who had lived in this village before the war. So she gave this girl an assignment to write a report. And the girl had interviewed the town historian and all the oldest people in the village. Her report had just won an award from the mayor. And at the center of the report was a picture of my mother and me that she had found on the internet. So it really made us seem like this world that we had no connection to at all. We actually did. It was a small world. Gabe, did you have anything that you remember from that?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. That's the best part of the whole story. You snagged it, but no, I just thought it was humbling, right, to meet the descendants of the people. I don't think I met any grandchildren, but I definitely met the children of the people.
Remember we had dinner with one of the grandsons. Do you remember that?
I don't specifically remember the dinner, but I do remember going to the house and meeting the children. And it's a humbling experience. Like they weren't the people that did it, but they bore the brunt too, right? Like those kids were beaten to cover the sounds in the attic. And you think, I am only alive and my mom's only alive, like the whole family's only alive today because this family made a choice to put themselves at risk and do the right thing, and try to save this other family that they didn't even really know. So it was a really powerful experience, I would say, to meet them.
They knew the other family. They knew the other family from
Right.
before the war.
Right.
That's how we happened to be there, because they knew us.
Mhm.
Leslie,
I just meant, they didn't owe you anything. They weren't your best friends. They just did the right thing.
No, but my grandparents were very good to them, and helped them a lot, helped to bring them up. And so that's why they did it.
Mm.
They were neighbors of theirs.
Leslie, could you speak to, this is a more US focused question. Do any panelists here worry about the authoritarian thinking that seems to be afflicting the far right and far left in the US? And what role do you think social media and cable news are playing into this dysfunctionality as people who are directly impacted by authoritarianism in the past and TV executives? I think that you have unique insight into this.
Right. Well, yes, I worry about it. And I think, one thing that you can't know the story of the Holocaust well and not think this could happen again. I mean, this was, in the history of civilization, this happened a nanosecond ago. And human beings have not evolved that much since that time. And, sometimes like school, we speak a lot at high schools and colleges, and students will say, well, how could this have happened? How could, why be negative about Jewish people? And I'll be speaking to an auditorium filled with all students of the same ethnicity, like 95% Latino, say, and Latinx, and 5% other students of color. And I'll say, look around your own auditorium. I said, aren't there students? I said, to me, you all look very similar, but to each other, I'm sure you have kids sitting in this row who you feel better than for some reason, who we all have a need to distinguish ourselves. And so I think this could happen again at any point. I think what's really important, President Bill Clinton actually gave, I think, the best advice one time. A reporter said, what advice would you give my 12-year-old son to have him make the world better? And he said, tell him to get to know as many people as he can his age who are different from him. And so I don't think the problem is necessarily cable news or, clearly we've seen that social media left unattended and not, social media has grown up, and we need thinking and policies that grow up with social media to make sure that it is, that there's context, that there are guidelines. But, in terms of cable news and all of that, to me, it's the modern version of the local newspaper on people's street corner. It's free speech, but what we want is, we want people listening to different points of view. Where it's going to be dangerous is if we're all only listening to people who look like ourselves and who sound like ourselves. We are going to exacerbate, we are not going to have the kind of greater and deeper understanding we need in this complicated world. So I think, as Gabe was suggesting, starting with education at the earliest stages, we need to understand different points of view, and we need to understand how to question, what is a fact, what is real information, and what is not real information. I mean, we need tools to deal with, information in today's world.
And one piece of nuance I would add to that is I do think that sometimes in our political conversation on cable news, we model conversation as combat, so that can only have an oppositional conversation about politics. And the moment there's consensus or understanding, they change the topic because that's deemed boring. And that models to us a way of always disagreeing rather than finding common ground. That could be a whole panel. Yep. And we could talk forever. As a final question, I do know you guys have an audiobook out. I wanted to ask you about the audiobook and who's doing the reading and acting in it. And was that a fun experience for you?
It was a really crazy experience. For years, I had thought people, come up to me and say, oh, where's the audiobook? I like to listen to books. And I always thought we should do it. And it was, I guess, a silver lining of COVID that sort of had the time, Beth Lieberman, who helped us edit the book to begin with, she said, I have an idea. And she put us together with a producer, and we had the time to get it done. We had a great actor, Beata Pozniak, who read my mom's part of the book, but we wrote a new afterword that my mom read and that I read. So it was a good experience doing it from my daughter's bedroom with curtains over her bed. And I had a new appreciation for how many gardeners are in our neighborhood, how many planes fly overhead. I realized that every home is not a natural sound studio. So it was challenging, but I'm so grateful that we've done it. Beata was fabulous. It was hard to get used to another voice playing my mom. And I think one of the reasons perhaps that she was a little bit emotional today, I mean, sometimes my mom this is an emotional topic, but I think it was really hard for her when she listened to someone read her mother's lines in the book. I mean, that was like bringing her mother to life again. And I think that was really difficult for my mom to listen to. She didn't listen to that much of it, but I do think it was trying. But we're really excited that an audiobook is out, and it's like hearing a story in 3D. So we urge you all to listen to it. Ma, do you have any other final comment on the audiobook?
I'd like to listen to it more.
You should put that on the Amazon reviews by the co-author. I would like to listen to it more.
We could continue this conversation. So interesting. To the Gilbert-Luries, thank you. And to Rita Lurie, thank you endlessly for sharing your experience and your openness today.
Thank you guys for being
Thank you,
there.
Michelle. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Okay, and thank you all. We're so grateful for this inspiring program. We really are. And Jessica, thank you again for being here today and for moderating. If you would like to follow Jessica on Instagram, please do at Jessica Yellin. And thank you again, Leslie, and thank you, Rita, and thank you, Gabe, for being here today and for so generously sharing your wisdom and your insights and your incredible family history with us. We thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We thank you. Holocaust Museum LA brings programs like today's discussion at no charge. So if you are enjoying our programs, we ask that you consider supporting our work by making a donation to the museum at holocaustmuseumla.org/donate, or better still, becoming a member. For more information about membership and a complete list of benefits, please visit our website again at holocaustmuseumla.org/membership. This Thursday, we invite you to join us at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for a survivor talk with Angelina Bilal. And next week on Tuesday, March 16 at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we welcome you to join our conversation with our partner EVO, which is the Institute of Jewish Research, about the importance of primary sources for Holocaust education. So with that, once again, we all thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.